Steve Bannon, the former White House chief of staff, has warned that this country is on the brink of civil war. The United Kingdom, England as he puts it, because Americans apparently can't tell the difference between England and the UK, but we'll leave that point, is on the brink of civil war. Civil war. Now, let's be very clear what we mean by civil war. Let's look at some civil wars in history. The Chinese Civil War, up to 10 million dead. The Russian Civil War, about 9 million dead. The Taiping Rebellion in China in the mid-19th century, up to 25 million dead. A bigger toll than the First World War. The Angolan and Mozambique civil wars in the 1970s to the 1990s, up to 1 million dead. Actually, the Angolan civil war ended in 2002. Up to 1 million dead each. The Sudanese civil wars, if we count today's conflict as the third civil war, goes into at least 2.5 to 3 million dead. Some would consider the Vietnam War and the Korean Wars to be civil wars. Millions dead in each of those conflicts. Even in smaller countries, if you look at the Central American republics, El Salvador, 75 to 100,000 dead. The Nicaraguan Revolution, 75,000 dead. The Guatemalan Civil War, 200,000 dead. Those are civil wars. The United States itself, which was, beyond living memory, but not ancient history, mid-19th century, 1860s, 750,000 to up to 1 million dead. There's not an exact figure in that, but the lower figure, 600,000, and it goes right up to 1 million. So 750,000 is the most likely sort of figure. The point here is that civil wars are extremely destructive and costly and violent. What Steve Bannon is saying is that this country, Britain in 2025, is about to replicate one of those examples that I've given. Now, to look at our own domestic history, the last time we truly had a civil war that can be called that, you really have to go back to the 17th century, to the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, which were extremely costly. The interlinked conflicts, the English Civil Wars, the Scottish Civil War, and the Irish Confederate Wars of that period. There may have been up to 600,000 killed, which proportionally made it a very, very devastating conflict. I was at an English Civil War reenactment a couple of years ago, and it was reenacting the 1643 Battle of Hilton here in Sunderland. Very interesting, but also very historic. We are not about to see a 21st century equivalent of that. We're just not. And it's deranged to argue that we are. I'm going to go into the report in a few minutes, so bear with me. But I really do think it's important to give this this prelude, this look at this situation. Excuse me. We had the Jacobite Rising in 1746, which was the last major sort of domestic uprising. Now, I am excluding the Northern Ireland Troubles here. They were pretty violent. 3,500 lives lost. So that would be an exception. But even that can't really be called a civil war. It's because it was within one of the home nations. So it was a bombing campaign in London. And it was awful for Northern Ireland. I'm from Northern Ireland. I'm certainly not downplaying that for a second. But we can't really call that a civil war. It wasn't even like the Irish Civil War, because for the most part, with the exception of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings of 1974, the Republic of Ireland wasn't really affected. The bulk of the violence was within Northern Ireland. There was a mainland campaign in Britain, and there was loyalist actions in the Republic of Ireland, but it never got to the point where the whole of Ireland, for example, was in flames. Not comparable to the Civil War of the early 1920s in that sense. So this hyperbole is just plain false, and I think it needs to be challenged, really challenged. Bannon's not the first one to come out with it. Elon Musk has stuck his nose into this country. When we had the riots last year, Musk was spreading around lies. And what I find sickening is people actually saying, because he falsely claimed that the government was sending rioters to the Falklands. When that was corrected, Musk's apologist said, oh, he made a mistake and he deleted it. Elon Musk is one of the most powerful men in the world. Bannon's one of the most powerful figures in the MAGA movement. When they lie, when you're in that sort of position of power and you lie, it has an effect. I will put it on record, I think MAGA is a complete and utter cesspit. I think this is the most extreme administration the United States has probably ever had, at least in modern times. I watched RFK Jr. being grilled yesterday by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warner of Virginia, and others, and he was clueless. He looked like, what's that expression, a deer in headlights. This is the man who's responsible for the American healthcare system, the man who is anti-vaxxers, railed against big pharmaceutical companies, and there's some ground for that. It's something that Bernie Sanders would agree with, but there's a big difference between that and the sort of things that RFK Jr. is coming out with. It's very dangerous to have an anti-vaxxer who would have the responsibility of approving vaccines or not. It just indicates that if there's another big pandemic on the scale of COVID, we might not see 1 million Americans dead, we might see millions of Americans dead. That's absolutely terrifying. Trump's surrounded by people like Laura Loomer. You know, she's not formally a member of his cabinet, but she definitely has his ear. Laura Loomer is a neo-Nazi. These are contemptible, extreme people. Tulsi Gabbard, Moscow Tulsi, I call her. This is a woman who has been shamelessly parroting Kremlin propaganda for years. I really think it's an extreme administration. You have Hegseth, you know, former Fox News pundit, who actually had a book that looked like it could have, honestly, it could have been an American equivalent of a brown shirt manual. He had this picture of himself holding the American flag, and he was going out on a crusade against the left. You know, it made Joseph McCarthy look normal. That sort of, these are the people that are in Trump's administration. And I really don't think we should be taking any lectures from them. You know, recently I made a video on the free speech issue, and I do think it is a problem. I do think there's legitimate concerns out there, and I think Starmer has failed to get a grip on it. But one of the reasons why I want to see this really tackled is because you'll get these extremists swooping in and saying, oh look, Britain has no free speech. Now that is not true. We do have free speech, testified by the fact that I can make this video openly. You know, I can openly criticise the government. I'm doing it right now. Starmer needs to get a grip on this. He's failed to get a grip on this. Look, I'm criticising the government. Am I being arrested? No. So fuck you, JD Vance. You know, this sort of extreme hyperbole is not helping anyone. But we do have issues. We do have things the public are absolutely right to be concerned about. Incidentally, the head of the Met has weighed into this free speech debate, so I'm going to be making another video about that. But one of the problems is it does allow these people to swoop in. It's extremely hypocritical, and what no one ever points out with the MAGA movement is Donald Trump and his minions would dearly love to shut down critical media. They'd love to shut down CNN and other outlets. So it's pretty damn rich for them to be preaching about free speech in Europe. I really think we should take no lectures from Vance or any of the MAGA loons on this issue. I really don't. And I think one of my criticisms of this government actually is it's too hesitant to stand up to Trumpism. I mean, when Trump came out and attacked Sadiq Khan, the most Starmer could muster up was a pretty feeble, actually he's a friend of mine. Now let's just be clear about this. Whether you like Sadiq Khan or not, and I probably wouldn't vote for him, the fact is he is a democratically elected mayor of London. And we have the President of the United States, a foreign leader, coming in and effectively telling the people of London they shouldn't vote for Khan. Imagine if Keir Starmer stuck his nose into the New York mayoral election and, you know, told people that they shouldn't vote for one candidate or another. It would be absolutely appalling. And yes, there is a lot of commentary in this country on American politics, but British politicians don't, they stop short of actually saying Americans should do this or should do that, and they should stop short of that. That's up to Americans to decide. If the majority of Americans want to be stupid enough to put a criminal like Trump back into office, that's their business. But for me, the issue is not commenting on what's going on in this country. It's the fact that these arrogant MAGA extremists think that they can dictate to us, or that they can spread lies about what's happening in this country. That is unacceptable. I know that Friedrich Merz, before he became Chancellor, he told Musk to keep his nose out of German politics in terms of Musk endorsing the AVD. Well, Elon Musk is not a German citizen. He has no right to vote in Germany. He can have an opinion, but I think Merz was right to push back on that. And I think Starmer should show more courage in standing up to Trump and his minions. I would make someone like Steve Bannon a persona non grata, because his hyperbole will incite trouble. Anyway, I'm going to get into the report. But yeah, on the point about commenting, just to elaborate on that, before I get into this, I don't say that Americans can't have views on what's happening in the UK, but they have to be accurate views. I mean, when you get someone like Steve Bannon spreading lies, like we're on the cusp of civil war, that isn't just an opinion. That is dangerously spreading a falsehood. It would be like, I'd try and draw an equivalent, it would be like some British politician or British public figure saying that, saying that the United States is on the brink of civil war. Whenever I've looked at that, because it has been speculated on, I've said we need to temper this. That's a big claim. I think America's a lot. If either country was close to civil war, the United States is a hell of a lot closer. Remember which country is awash with guns? It's not the UK. Anyway, because if Bannon and his other MAGA cultists really believe in the Second Amendment, they would have to believe that every American should have access to a firearm, including the left. So how do they tap into that? How do they reconcile that if they really believe in the Second Amendment? By extension, they'd have to believe that every Trump critic should have a right to be armed. Okay, this is a report. It is by Rob Crilly in the Daily Telegraph. The rise of radical Islam has pushed England to the brink of civil war, according to one of Donald Trump's most powerful allies. Steve Bannon delivered his dire warning at a gathering of America First thinkers in Washington on Thursday, painting a bleak picture of Europe and describing a planet that was already in the kinetic phase of World War III. He made fiery populist rhetoric with quotes from the Financial Times to explain that cratering 30-year bond markets in Europe illustrated deep instability. The 30-year bond markets are saying, "We're not so sure you're going to be around," he said. "England is heading to a civil war as we speak." Mr. Bannon was the White House's chief strategist at the start of Mr. Trump's first term. Today he's one of the MAGA movement's most powerful figures, using his War Room show to reach millions of viewers. He is not afraid to use bombastic rhetoric and dark visions of an apocalyptic future to keep his audience coming back. And there's a nice picture there of Farage with his Cheshire grin next to Bannon. Farage seems to love pandering to American extremists. And he cited the southern appearance of thousands of English and British flags across the nation as a sign that a showdown was looming. "It's heading there," he said. "Why? They have a problem with radical Islam that they have not dealt with, and it's metastasizing and getting worse." He was speaking at NatCom 5, a conference of the National Conservative Movement. Its members seek to develop an intellectual framework for Trumpism, knitting together elements of national and cultural identity with the importance of family life in opposition to globalism and liberalism, which might explain why people sympathetic to that ideology literally would love to go to Putin's Russia. I'm thinking of that MAGA voting Texan who decided to bring his family there, then went missing. Speakers at a downtown Washington hotel included members of the Trump administration such as Tom Homan, the border czar, and Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, along with writers and thinkers. Moscow Tulsi. But Mr. Bannon, who maintains close ties with Mr. Trump's inner circle, drew one of the biggest crowds for a speech urging the US to stay out of Ukraine and Israel's wars. It may actually be right about Israel. America has been funding Israel for too damn long. Might be the only area where I think Bannon is right, but I say that with a great deal of caution. He said the biggest existential threat to Israel did not come from Tehran, but from New York City. Was so. Oh, right. Well, I retract what I've said. I thought he was going to say that American taxpayers shouldn't be funding Israel's defense. But anyway, but from New York City, where Zohran Mamdani is favoured to become its first Muslim mayor when voters go to the polls in November, he's been a frequent critic of Israel. What's happened in London in the last 10 years? Are people asleep? Asked Mr. Bannon. What's happened in Paris? What's happened in Brussels? Again, this taps into the Byline Times article I was talking about, where there's big right-wing backlash against Sadiq Khan, despite the fact Londoners have given Khan a third term. What's happened to every country except for Hungary and Poland, the ones that said, no, we're not going to do this, we're going to keep our culture. Mr. Bannon said the threat from Mr. Mamdani, who has faced Islamophobic abuse online since emerging as a frontrunner, went deeper than the threat from a radical socialist. Do you think Sadiq Khan's giving back London? Are these guys giving back Paris? Are they giving back Brussels? He asked. The English people know this. What do you think they're putting the flags up for? England is heading for a very dark place. Questions over free speech in the UK also came up at the White House on Thursday during a dinner hosted for tech executives. Mark Zuckerberg, the chief executive of Meta, Facebook's parent company, laughed nervously when asked if he was concerned by recent arrests for social media posts in Britain. You didn't think you'd get that question, did you? Mr. Trump joked to his guest, who claimed that he wasn't paying attention before asking the reporter to repeat the question. This is the beginning of your political career, said Mr. Trump to Mr. Zuckerberg, who quickly replied, no, it's not, as he handed the question over to the US president. Taking over, Mr. Trump said he was very surprised by the UK government's apparent crackdown on social media posts. He said, strange things are happening over there. They're cracking down, surprisingly so. Mr. Trump added, I've spoken to the Prime Minister and let's see what happens. It's sad and it's not a good thing. In July, Mr. Trump reignited a long-running feud with the Mayor of London. During a trip to Scotland, he was asked whether he would visit London during his forthcoming state visit. I'm not a fan of your mayor, he said. I think he's done a terrible job. The Mayor of London, a nasty person. But Donald Trump, he is the Mayor of London, democratically elected by the people of London. So by attacking Khan, Trump is disrespecting the voters of London. That's the reality. It would be like Sadiq Khan or Keir Starmer basically insulting the 65 million or 70 million, whatever the figure was, Americans who voted Trump back into office. You know, they would absolutely not accept that. In fact, Trump would probably have one of his tantrums and increase tariffs if Keir Starmer or any other senior British politician insulted the millions of MAGA voters. So why is it okay for Trump to insult 9 million Londoners who put Sadiq Khan back in office? Yes, technically they didn't all vote for him, but you get the point. Khan was democratically elected by the people of London. I don't particularly care for his politics. He's well to the left of where I would be. He's absolutely pandered to some divisive woke ideology. I wouldn't vote for Sadiq Khan. But that's beside the point. He is the Mayor of London. And I think it's contemptible that Trump thinks he can pontificate on who the Mayor of London should be. And like I say, the most Starmer could come out with was a rather weak, oh, he's a friend of mine. You know, Starmer is just too hesitant to stand up to Trump, unlike Macron and Merz, who have stood up to Trump. And also MAGA people. I mean, when, like I say, I don't know if I mentioned it in this video because this is a re-upload, but basically, when Elon Musk was sticking his nose into German politics, like I say, Merz stood up to him. Why is it people in this country on the political right think it's perfectly okay for American billionaires and multimillionaires to try and dictate and interfere with what's happening in this country? I mean, you look at someone like Musk's father, forget the guy's name, is it Elon Musk, or, you know, who is a big fan of Putin, going over to the Kremlin, This is the sort of people that think they have a right to interfere in our domestic affairs. I think one of the biggest things that dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping are counting on is Western internal strife. And one of the things that's fueling that is far right disinformation. One of them is the great replacement theory, this idea that there is an actual organised plot to replace white people. What's actually happening is where you have mass immigration, where you have tensions brought about by immigration, there is understandable anxiety and there is some questions being brought about by that. But it is deranged to think that someone fleeing Afghanistan or Syria or Eritrea is part of this kind of plot to replace white people. It's nonsense. As for civil war, like I say, last year Musk was spreading lies about the riots. He falsely claimed that the government was sending rioters to the Falklands. It's just a lie. But then when that was exposed, it was taken down, and Musk's apologist said, "Oh, he made a mistake. He's allowed to make a mistake." My point is, if you have someone as powerful as Elon Musk deliberately spreading lies, it's dangerous. And if it is a genuine mistake, what does it say about Musk? It says that he's a man-child who has no self-control. Donald Trump's the same. Donald Trump for years has been spreading lies. His Truth Social is a cesspit of lies. And these are the people that the rights in this country, or a big portion of the right, seem to think we should be listening to. You know, I've spoken about the free speech issue on numerous occasions. I do think that the Prime Minister's got a problem here, and I think Starmer hasn't addressed it as well as he should have. It's not good enough to just say we've a long tradition of free speech in this country when people do have legitimate concerns about how, for example, non-crime hate incidents are policed. And I know that Sir Mark Rowley has now waded into this. I'm going to make a video specifically on that. But there is one area I do agree with the Prime Minister on. Free speech doesn't give anyone a right to incite violence. It just doesn't. And what is disgusting about the likes of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Steve Bannon, they're literally arguing, and JD Vance, it's okay to incite violence. That's literally what they're arguing for. And why wouldn't they? These are the people who were perfectly okay with violent thugs trying to attack the US Capitol. And we know that because Donald Trump's pardoned them. So it sickens me that anyone thinks they have any moral high ground, that we should be listening to them at all. If Donald Trump and JD Vance and the whole MAGA cesspit had its way, CNN would be shut down. Journalists critical of Trump would be shut down. So I really would take it with a pinch of salt, this idea that we should take lectures from Vance or Trump on free speech. Trump's a wannabe dictator. He admires dictators. And the only reason he had the tantrum about that parade in Beijing was nothing to do with Western security. Donald Trump himself, I believe, is a threat to Western security. It's because Trump feels left out. He probably feels he should have been invited along. Trump wanted a military parade of his own. So this has nothing to do with criticising Putin and Xi and Kim. It's nothing to do with a Western president standing up for Western security. This is Donald Trump feeling he was left out of the show. It's his ego talking. Let's not forget, only last month, Donald Trump invited Putin to Anchorage at a time when Russian warplanes are killing Ukrainian civilians. He allowed Putin an international platform to spew out his sick jokes about our brother nation, whilst he was, whilst his forces were firing drones on Ukrainian children. It's sickening. I think Trump's a threat to the West, and I really, really, really hope the Democrats can get their act together. I'll be infuriated with the Democrats if they do not win in 2028. What they need to do is stop this culture war nonsense. They need to stop obsessing over microaggressions and start getting real. They need to think, how do we beat Donald Trump and the MAGA movement in 2028? It isn't just about Donald Trump. In fact, Trump's term limit will expire. So really, it's how do we beat JD Vance? How do we beat Tulsi Gabbard? How do we beat one of these other people that could be eyeing the White House? The one good thing is they won't have the sort of cult following that Trump has, but the Democrats can't be complacent. They lost in 24, and I think one of the main reasons for that was, I think Biden himself was quite arrogant in failing to see that he should have stepped down earlier, particularly when he said and suggested that he'd be a transitional president. I think it was Biden's ego. He should have stepped down earlier, which would have given Harris a longer campaign, and she might have won. She still might have lost. Plenty of people were never going to trust a California politician, but we'll never know. But anyway, I'll wrap this up, but I really feel disgusted that these MAGA extremists think that they can lecture this country. As for civil war, there will be some people in this country who will lap that up. And they'll say, oh, because the anger is so strong, yes, we're on the brink of civil war. What we might see is riots. We might see a repeat of what happened last year, which is a problem. I'm not trivializing that for a second. It is a problem. But even there, it wouldn't come close to the worst riots we've had in this country. In 1780, the Gordon riots in London, up to 500 people died in that violence, and even that fell short of the French Revolution. Britain, for all the anger that we face, for all the social disorder that we have faced in our great cities, in Bristol, in Belfast, in London, we have always fallen short of the sort of turmoil that other countries have seen. And it's a good thing. That's something that's welcome. We have not had a civil war in this country in 350 years. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it will never happen. I just don't think that disinformation and right-wing anger alone, and left-wing anger over the Palestine issue, is enough to create civil war. You see riots and protests in most countries, in some form or another. In 2025, we have seen unrest in Turkey. We've seen unrest in Indonesia, in Serbia. Why is Bannon not talking about Indonesia being on the brink of civil war? Because it doesn't suit his agenda. It's not in Europe, therefore it doesn't suit this narrative of Europe's about to collapse. I think Europe has problems. I think there are social tensions. And yes, I do think there's a problem with Islamic extremism, but not the sort of thing that he's talking about. It's just not. And Angela Rayner's just resigned. Okay, so it's a political scandal. Sometimes we see hyperbole even in the mainstream press. I mean, I'm just saying on a Telegraph article here, who could replace Rayner and plunge Labour into civil war? Maybe that's overused. When we're talking about political scandals, political resignations, civil war is perhaps overused in this context, and it's almost mocking of actual civil wars. Even there, look at the way our politics works. We have peaceful transfers of power. When Rishi Sunak stepped down as Prime Minister, he was polite and statesmanlike in terms of welcoming Keir Starmer to number 10. That's how British politics works, and I think it's a good thing. Of course there's angry disputes, and there should be. Democratic politics should be adversarial by nature. But we have peaceful transfers of power. When was the last time a British general election resulted in any significant violence? You'd have to go back probably to the Chartist movement. So my point with all of this is what Bannon's talking about is complete rubbish. We are not on the brink of civil war. We're just not. And anyone who thinks that is deluded. What we may see is riots. We may see serious social disorder, and that is a problem. That's why the government needs to do a lot more to get in touch with some of those sentiments. But that doesn't necessarily mean a lurch to the right. Remember, there's a lot of left-wing dissatisfaction as well. And I think, frankly, the government should be a bit more vocal in standing up to Trump extremists. I would definitely not give a visa to Steve Bannon. And if Trump kicks up a stink about that, let him. I would say, if I was Keir Starmer, I'd say, Mr. President, we'll work with you, but we're not going to tolerate one of your minions. He's not going to use that word, but we're not going to tolerate anyone trying to stoke up internal strife within this country. That's it. And Trump has to take it or leave it, because I think then the rhetoric should increase and Starmer should have the backbone to say, Mr. President, do not interfere in our domestic politics. Will Starmer have the guts to do that? Because I think at that point he would have to. And then Trump can make his threats, but again, Western countries need to do a lot more to stand up to Donald Trump and his whole cesspit of an administration. I just think it's so ironic that a man who was part of a movement that incited domestic violence has the gall, has the arrogance to say that this country's on the brink of civil war. Even the most hardline GB News presenter can't seriously believe that. You will get pockets who believe it. You get people within the Homeland movement or the Patriotic Alternative and all the other fringe groups that not only believe this, but they might even want it. This is the thing. I think Bannon would love to see violence in Britain. I think Elon Musk would love to see violence in Britain. If there's some major Islamist attack with mass casualties, it would be wonderful for them, because then they get to play politics. They get to say to Starmer, we told you so. They don't really care about morality. I've myself been saying for years that we haven't taken Islamic extremism as seriously as we should be. I don't like the term Islamophobia. I think it's used to silence legitimate criticism. But again, that's not evidence of civil war. The last major Islamist attack we had now was 5 years ago. 2020, the attack in Reading. Contrast that to the frequency of mass shootings in America. You know, again, America's awash with gun, Britain isn't. So which country is more likely to have the means for fighting a civil war? It's absolute rubbish, but the reason I draw attention to this is because some people will lap it up.